Jon Schnur is with us. He's the Executive Chairman of America Achieves. Welcome.
So I'm so excited to be with this group. You have a lot of power in your hands in this room, given your leadership roles, your entrepreneurship, your networks, and I'm going to share my own perspective, having worked for 20 plus years in education in the United States. I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur. I've started up several nonprofit education initiatives to improve education in the US. I've worked for 2 US presidents, and most challenging and most fun, I'm an active dad of 3 young kids. And I think there's a lot of evidence from the US that I think can inform how we think and you think about lifting up youth in a digital age in Europe. First, my overarching point to you is I think the fundamental point to understand about learning and education is that we're at a time of unprecedented change, as has been talked about today, in the workforce, in information flow, in how people relate to each other, in the competition for education and learning, namely all the multimedia, information, entertainment that comes in a highly stimulating way to young people. We are at a time of massive change in every way. And the question has been alluded to is, what is it going to take for the way learning and education is done broadly, not limited to technology, to make sure that our young people can adapt to a world that is changing at an unprecedented rate? I'll make 4 points, 4 themes that I've seen in the US. They all have that kernel underneath. First, what's the context in the US about what's happened in education, and what are the implications for what's needed? I think people get this analysis off sometimes, and there's a polarizing debate sometimes that's not helpful. Here's the facts. The facts are that in the US, and I think in a lot of Europe too, that we essentially have moved ahead in education by many measures on outcomes for kids, and we've been slipping behind at the same time. We're moving ahead and we're slipping behind. How is that possible? It's confusing. It leads people to have very different views about what's happening. In the Vodafone report that came out today, there's an example of this where most education institutions in Europe think they're doing a good job preparing young people for careers, and most employers and most students don't think they're getting good preparation for careers. In the US, we have similar trends. And the facts are that on most measures, we have seen incremental improvement in US outcomes, more high school graduates, more college graduates, improved achievement on most levels, particularly for low-income kids. But the changes have been incremental compared to the new bar, or new skill bar, given the changed economy. So in the early 1970s in the US, 1 in 4 jobs required post-secondary education, 1 in 4. Basically, a high school degree with routine skills was the ticket to a middle-class job, 1 in 4. Soon, nearly 2 in 3 US jobs will require post-secondary education, and not the routine skills of yesterday, but the non-routine skills, the deeper learning, the ability to apply to solve problems, the critical thinking. This is a seismic shift in the increase in skill bar, and the US has gone like this, where the bar has gone like this. One example of the measure is in 1995, the US was #1 in the world in the percentage of young people with college degrees, #1 in the world, 33%. Last year, we went up to 39%, but went from #1 in the world to #19 in the world. And maybe even more significantly, the income and employment gap between those with some post-secondary education and those without has gone up. Our education inequality hasn't gone up, it's gotten a little bit better, but the consequences of education inequality have grown dramatically in terms of employment and skills and compensation. One other measure that some of you know, the PISA, the International PISA exam, which looks at problem solving, critical thinking skills, and reading, math, science. And we're putting out a report with the OECD shortly that shows, interestingly, that we have our disadvantaged students in the US have actually made significant gains. That's been where the focus has been in the US for the last 10 years. But our middle class and above have been flat. And so overall, this would have been flatness because we've actually focused on helping improve low-achieving kids. Now, that doesn't mean there's a choice to be had. We can accelerate the gains for low-income kids, but we've got to broaden out. This is not just an issue for poor kids in poor neighborhoods. This is an issue for most kids in most neighborhoods. How do they get the skills needed to adapt to a new age? And meanwhile, when you look at that data, our 55-year-olds and older in the US are top tier in literacy in the world compared to people of their age. And young people are at the bottom tier, but actually young people are doing just as well as the older Americans. So we've slipped in rank even though we have stayed the same or made slight increases in skill. So the fundamental question is not how do you fix a failed system, I think that's unproductive because we've actually gotten better, I think, in the US and around the world. Nor is it okay to keep the system the same. The question, how do you have dramatic change to kind of help young people prepare for a dramatically changed world? I'll just make a couple other points before I close, and then we'll go into the panel. Second point is, in the US, we probably haven't done as good a job as you have on helping those kids who are not going to a 4-year college degree. We've got a little more than 1 in 3 US students who graduate from a post-secondary college degree program. We've got no plan for the other 2 in 3 who actually could have pathways to skills and medium and high skills careers. We're working on that, but we haven't adapted to that shift. And the other point I'd tell you in terms of changes that we haven't made, although we've got this in pockets, I think this is important for any country, and including for the new generation rising up, to keep this in mind. While we're making all these system changes, and technology is part of it, we need high standards, we need better teaching, we need good implementation of systems, technology is a part. But we need a seriousness of purpose about learning and education as well from students and their families. And what I've seen in the highest performing countries in the world is that there's a seriousness of purpose about learning and education that isn't because education is just the most important thing, but my very last comment is that it's aligned to what's valued in that country. And the question is, how do you look at the cultural values in the country and align your education work to actually support that, to ensure there's a demand and motivation to match the supply of skills you're providing?
Jon, thank you very much indeed.